All right, YouTube, it's time for occult video, occult literature video, that is, number 26 on the most infamous of all occult works. There is none that sells better. There is none that is more notorious, more infamous, and more diabolical. It is the ultimate granddaddy of all diabolical texts, the Grand Grimoire, the Red Dragon, of course. Now, this comes in two editions. It comes in sort of the French and Italian traditions. They're more or less the same. I've read both. The Italian edition has a little bit of extra material added on the end. That seems to be basically the only fundamental difference other than language. Now, as always, link in the description to where you can purchase this work. I've released an edition. It's on Amazon. Second link to my books blog. If you're into the diabolical, you can always get the Grimorium Verum. I've released that. The Little Albert, the only good English edition of the Little Albert that anybody has ever released. I've got it for you. The other editions are crap. I've already read through or skimmed through them. They're either in other languages or they're no good anyway, and they make a bunch of claims that aren't original to the text. The Grand Grimoire is the single most weird work you're going to read if you're into the occult. Now, actual sort of spiritual occultists, those that practice high magic in some form or another, generally spurn the work as being outrageous. They say, oh, this isn't even real like occultism. It's just a bunch of really weird, warped folk rites mixed in with sort of summon the devil material. Of course, the main point of much of the text is to summon Lucifuge Rofocal, which is a demon, sort of a prince of hell under Satan himself, to get treasure, to get, whatever you want, and to draw up a pact with this being. A literal pact in blood. That's sort of where this idea comes from. In most grimoires, you don't have this stuff. Even the Grimorium Verum that talks about like burying a dead man's head in the ground with bean sprouts in his eyeballs, or boiling a cat alive or something like that, even that doesn't stoop to the realm of weird the same way the Grand Grimoire does. It talks about enchanting firearms. It talks about how to win the lottery. It's like the original gangster of these sort of rather short occult manuscripts that have a Hylic disposition to them. That is, mostly they talk about, obtain wealth, obtain sex, whatever, destroy your foes. Not necessarily the most authentic material within the occult. Now, this is an Enlightenment era work. It doesn't date to the Renaissance, and it certainly doesn't date to antiquity. It talks about how to make the Philosopher's Stone. It gives a fairly simple recipe, by the way, for doing this. And this actually may be more or less authentic. The alchemists, depending on who you listen to, certainly not Magnus or some of those individuals, state quite clearly, the Sorcerer's Stone is pretty mundane. It's actually made with cheap materials. Here are its medicinal properties. In the Grand Grimoire, it tells you, straight up how to make this sort of thing. It tells you sort of the secrets of the magic arts in a general sense. It talks about making divining rods for various purposes. It, of course, includes the building your wand of witch hazel, Hazelwood, as it's originally termed, sort of stuff. This is in use for drawing up your ritual circle, for calling forth these demons. It explains a little bit about the rudiments of demonology as the Grand Grimoire claims them. It's a warped work, and it's very, very interesting. This is, I think, the second occult work I ever read after the Clavicles of Solomon. I think I read the Clavicles and I realized it was interesting. Yeah, I was a Christian at the time. Then I got the Grand Grimoire and I read that, thought that was even cooler. Got the Lesser Keys of Solomon. That was interesting, and I sort of went from there. But it's definitely the most notorious occult work. There's no way around it. It is the most notorious for being diabolical. Maybe not the most famous in other fields. For instance, the Rosary of the Philosophers is basically the foremost alchemical text. The Testament of Solomon is the foremost, insofar as texts that sort of tell a story in some way. Then there are, philosophical texts, some of the Gnostic works. But the Grand Grimoire, as far as the weird sort of French cycle materials, the Enlightenment era sort of folk works, diabolical material, sort of blast your enemies with magic, destroy them, fucking take their treasure. The Grand Grimoire is number one. There's no other text that comes anywhere near the Grand Grimoire as far as its content. It is the most outrageous thing that you will ever read. And that's not to say that it's not a really good text. It's certainly well written. I like to think that my edition is more refined than some others. I've sort of modernized some of the language, increased the quality of the images, the woodcuts taken from the older versions. It's about 58 pages long, and that's in a larger trim size. It's actually more or less a full-length work. If I were to work this into the usual 5x8 trim I use for many of my works, it'd probably be about 80 pages in length, which is pretty decent for a grimoire from its time period, actually. Can you imagine the printing costs back then of something that had that many pages when they had to be manually pressed? It's a little bit different now with modern-day printing, but it's certainly, of all occult texts that have ever been penned, as far as stuff that doesn't come from very recently, you're talking the last 20 or 30 years, when there's stuff like the Book of Azazel or Legion 49 or something, like Barry Hale. Other than that, the Grand Grimoire is the text to beat when it comes to diabolical scheming. You are literally summoning a demon in order to form a satanic pact with it to call forth other demons for various purposes, along with the folk magic. It's like a mixture of the more diabolical aspects of the Grimorium Verum and the Enchiridion overlapped with the folk works of the Little Albert. That's how diabolical it really is. I strongly recommend this work, whether you're interested in it from an anthropological perspective or you're actually interested in practicing its rites. This is the work to beat. Of all occult works that I've edited, I think it was the second occult work that I edited, and it was for a reason, because it's that important within the realm of modern-day occultism. A lot of the stuff you get now, a lot of the more dark arts sort of aspects of magic, they come from the Grand Grimoire or are directly influenced by it. So again, link in the description to where you can purchase my edition of this work. And by the way, in my defense, there is one-star rating on there that talks about sloppy formatting. The format on the original edition that I released was fairly poor. It was one of the first works that I made. It was admittedly substandard. I have improved it. I completely redid the cover art and the internal work of the files. It's totally different now. It is no longer in a sloppy format. Doesn't have a couple of the other glaring errors that the original had. So at your hazard, of course, I may be biased, but you can ignore that review because it was left before I actually reworked the edition. I was going to re-upload it, but so many copies were being sold and other positive reviews came in, I said, what's the use of losing the progress I've made and waiting another year for it to really take off again? So I just did that and just said, this one low rating doesn't really ultimately matter. But yes, it has been reworked. It is in a much improved form. And this is probably going to be the longest of the occult literature videos because the work is so important. It is so popular compared to you would probably get sales to Africa and all sorts of places like that. Anyone who's into the devil, the diabolical, killing your enemies or something with magic, it's all there. This is the work for what you intend to do. Of course, disclaimer, I don't intend for you to kill your enemies or do anything else that's illegal. That's about all. Peace out.